Once upon a time, Rudy Giuliani was a crime-busting prosecutor who became the tough-talking mayor of New York City. But he's recently become a parody of himself through a series of very public debacles. These are Rudy Giuliani's most embarrassing moments. When Rudy Giuliani embarked on his failed presidential run in 2007, the smoking gun uncovered a 450-page report commissioned ahead of his 1993 election as mayor of New York City. The most eyebrow-raising part of the report highlighted Giuliani's 14-year first marriage. That was because Giuliani's first wife, Regina Peruggi, was his second cousin. As the New York Times reported, the marriage was annulled because they did not seek a church dispensation that would have allowed the cousins to marry. According to PolitiFact, Giuliani had alternately described he and his ex-wife as, quote, second cousins once removed and third cousins. The report cited by the smoking gun also pointed out some rather glaring inconsistencies and public statements that Giuliani had made about his marriages. The report read, when asked about his personal life, Giuliani gives a wide array of conflicting answers. All of this brings the soundness of his judgment into question and the veracity of his answers. Giuliani's personal life has been colorful, to say the least. This has definitely been the case in his 3 failed marriages, all of which led him to become engulfed in scandal. As The Cut recalled, Giuliani married Donna Hanover in 1984. In 2000, Giuliani held a press conference to announce his separation from Hanover, who learned about her separation from that very press conference. In the same press conference, he bizarrely referenced his friend Judith Nathan, with whom he was widely speculated to have already begun dating. Hanover responded by holding her own press conference a few hours later, accusing Giuliani of having an affair with a former staffer, an accusation that Giuliani and the staffer both denied. Giuliani subsequently filed divorce papers, while Hanover was granted a temporary restraining order preventing Nathan from visiting the New York City mayor's official residence, Gracie Mansion. After the divorce was finalized, Giuliani married Nathan in 2003. Rudy Giuliani and Judith Nathan's marriage ended in 2019 amidst rumors that, once again, Giuliani was cheating. Page 6 quoted a source claiming Giuliani had boasted of an affair with a woman who was well-endowed. This led to speculation that Giuliani's married mistress was Maria Ryan, a hospital administrator from New Hampshire. Giuliani responded by blasting the rumor as false, telling Page 6 that whoever told them that lied. Giuliani also denied cheating on his wife. However, Nathan said it was Giuliani who was the liar, telling Page 6, "My husband's denial of the affair with the married Mrs. Ryan is as false as his claim that we were separated when he took up with her." The ensuing divorce was described by the New York Times as ugly, with the legal proceedings serving to publicly air all manner of dirty laundry. Among the information detailed in the court case was Giuliani's extravagant splurges, with Nathan alleging he spent over $7,000 on fountain pens and $12,000 on cigars. In 2018, rumors emerged that Rudy Giuliani was hitting the bottle a bit too hard. As a source speaking with New York revealed, "I've seen Giuliani drink more in the past 2 years than I'd seen him drink in the past 20. Giuliani fired back in an interview with Politico, refuting an allegation that he was passed over for a cabinet position in the Trump administration, and insisting, "I'm not drinking for lunch. I may have a drink for dinner. I like to drink with cigars." Meanwhile, Giuliani also developed a reputation for butt-dialing reporters, accidentally ringing up journalists without realizing they were listening in on his conversations. This took place in October 2019 when he accidentally called an NBC News reporter, with the call, a conversation involving a deal in Bahrain, going to voicemail. As HuffPost reported, this wasn't an isolated incident, with numerous reporters chiming in to share their stories of receiving a Giuliani butt dial. As the 2020 presidential election loomed, Giuliani, who was President Donald Trump's personal attorney, embarked on a tour of Ukraine to investigate widely debunked claims that Joe Biden and son Hunter Biden were involved in shady dealings. It all blew up in Giuliani's face when a whistleblower claimed Trump was deliberately withholding hundreds of millions in desperately needed aid, while pressuring recently elected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate the Bidens. During a phone call on which Giuliani was named several times, That call directly led Trump to become the third president in America's history to be impeached. When news of the whistleblower's allegations first broke, Giuliani was reportedly apoplectic. He told The Atlantic, "It is impossible that the whistleblower is a hero and I am not, and I will be the hero. These morons, when this is over, I will be the hero." In response to Giuliani's rant, a White House official told The Atlantic that the situation was the result of Rudy putting thoughts in Trump's head, while a House Republican aide derided Giuliani as a, quote, moron. In the fall of 2019, Giuliani was heavily involved in digging up Ukrainian dirt on Joe Biden, which led him to hook up with Ukrainian-born U.S. citizens Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. That October, the pair was arrested while trying to exit the country. According to CBC News, Fruman and Parnas were charged with conspiracy, making false statements to the Federal Election Commission, and falsification of records. They were described as having key roles in Giuliani's efforts to get Ukrainian officials to launch an investigation into the Bidens, reportedly at the behest of then-President Donald Trump. After his arrest, Parnas appeared ready to tell all when he appeared on Rachel Maddow's MSNBC show.
President Trump knew exactly what was going on.
Parnas further alleged, "It wasn't supposed to be a corruption announcement. It had to be about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Burisma." Giuliani later claimed he'd been led astray by his arrested associates. Leading up to the 2020 presidential election, Rudy Giuliani's efforts to find dirt on Joe Biden coalesced into a dubious story in the New York Post. The twisty tale began when someone who may have been Hunter Biden dropped off some waterlogged laptops at a Delaware computer repair shop. When they weren't retrieved, the shop's legally blind owner went through the hard drives and uncovered some unverified emails that allegedly indicated a convoluted plot to enrich the former vice president. As NPR pointed out, the story was, quote, marked more by red flags than investigative rigor. Meanwhile, it sure appeared that Giuliani got played by Russian intelligence agents. The Washington Post reported that U.S. intelligence officials warned that Russian operatives were seeking to provide Giuliani with disinformation to use against the Bidens, while NBC News reported the FBI was investigating whether the laptop story originated in the Kremlin and not a Delaware repair shop. The story proved to be so convoluted and nonsensical that it could barely be understood. But perhaps the final nail in its coffin came when Anthony Bobolinsky, a former Hunter Biden associate, attempted to verify it, providing his own claims and documentation.
I've heard Joe Biden say that he's never discussed business with Hunter. That is false.
The Wall Street Journal examined Bobolinsky's claims and found that Joe Biden had no role in whatever Hunter actually had going on, and so the tool intended to inflict political damage was a massive flop. As Rudy Giuliani frantically flailed trying to get some traction for his Hunter Biden laptop story, he wound up making a movie cameo that was as unexpected as it was hilarious. In the sequel to Sacha Baron Cohen's mockumentary Borat, Giuliani is interviewed in a hotel suite by actor Maria Bakalova, playing the 15-year-old daughter of Cohen's titular Borat. She leads Giuliani, flirting shamelessly, into an adjoining hotel room outfitted with hidden cameras. Giuliani lies back on the bed and jams his hand into his pants. Then Borat, dressed in women's clothing, bursts into the room.
She's 15, she's too old for you.
Giuliani defended himself via Twitter thread, calling the hidden camera video, quote, a complete fabrication, and claiming he was merely tucking in his shirt after removing the recording equipment he had been wearing. He even boldly claimed, "This is an effort to blunt my relentless exposure of the criminality and depravity of Joe Biden and his entire family." Cohen responded, in character as Borat, "I here to defend America's mayor, Rudolph Giuliani. What was an innocent, sexy time encounter between a consenting man and my 15-year-old daughter has been turned into something disgusting by fake news media." If ever there was a metaphor for Rudy Giuliani's inept attempts to prove non-existent voter fraud and invalidate an election, it was his widely mocked press conference at a Philadelphia landscaping center. It began when President Donald Trump announced on Twitter that Giuliani would hold a press conference at the Four Seasons. Trump deleted that original tweet and offered another, explaining he wasn't talking about the posh downtown hotel, but Four Seasons Total Landscaping, conveniently located near Fantasy Island abandoned adult bookstore on the outskirts of town. As if the venue wasn't embarrassing enough, in the midst of the live televised presser, Giuliani was informed that the news departments of America's major TV networks had just called the election for Joe Biden. On cue, Giuliani provided a bonkers meltdown that could be used verbatim as the script for a Saturday Night Live sketch. Sarcastically mocking reporters, he said, "Oh my goodness, all the networks, wow."
All the networks! We have to forget about the law!
A reporter for Canada's CBC News who attended the event offered her take on what she'd witnessed, describing the scene as, quote, chaotic, confusing, and a bit surreal. For most people, the Four Seasons total landscaping disaster would mark an all-time low. When it came to Giuliani's increasingly frantic attempts to overthrow the presidential election, he hadn't even come close to hitting bottom. Case in point, his subsequent press conference with Trump's legal team, once again offering no evidence to substantiate claims of voter fraud. Rather than citing laws and statutes, Giuliani instead referenced the 1992 comedy My Cousin Vinny while sweating profusely.
Did you all watch My Cousin Vinny?
Thanks to that excessive perspiration, the presser became downright bizarre when, as the sweaty lawyer ranted, dark liquid began oozing down both sides of Giuliani's face. As the goo dripped down, the live-streamed broadcast of the press conference, featured on the Trump campaign's YouTube and Facebook platforms, included a brief audio conversation from a pair of unidentified voices who apparently didn't realize their mics were on. One says, "Can they hear us on the stream? I guess not." The other asked if anyone else could see the hair dye dripping down Rudy's face. The Trump campaign later claimed without proof that the live feed had been improperly accessed. What does it say that Rudy Giuliani's daughter, Carolyn, apparently disagrees with him so much she wrote a lengthy op-ed for Vanity Fair, declaring she would be voting for Joe Biden in the upcoming presidential election? She wrote, "If being the daughter of a polarizing mayor who became the president's personal bulldog has taught me anything, it is that corruption starts with yes men and women, the cronies who create an echo chamber of lies and subservience to maintain their proximity to power. We've seen this ad nauseum with Trump and his cadre of high-level sycophants, the ones who weren't convicted anyway." In a subsequent post-election piece for Vanity Fair, Carolyn Giuliani offered some hilariously scathing, quote, self-care tips for Trump world to help them come to grips with the fact that Trump lost the election. She wrote, "Take stock of your failures. Only sociopathic narcissists have delusions of grandeur, blaming others for their failings, often with tragic consequences." She also took a shot at her father's hair dye fiasco by writing, "Avoid charcoal products or anything with artificial dyes, which may result in your face oozing as you make false claims of voter fraud in Philadelphia, for example." According to NBC News, the last time Rudy Giuliani argued a case in federal court was 1992. Yet, to describe his performance in a Philadelphia courtroom in November 2020 as rusty would be an insult to rust. As the Patriot News reported, rather than present evidence, Giuliani instead presented unsubstantiated accusations about a nationwide conspiracy among Democrats to steal the election. Highlights of Giuliani's return to the courtroom included mistaking the judge for a different judge, describing an opposing attorney as, quote, "the man who was very angry with me, I forgot his name," and not knowing what opacity means. As Law and Crime pointed out, Giuliani guessed it, quote, "probably means you can see," while the judge corrected him by saying that, quote, "it means you can't." While he may have previously referenced My Cousin Vinny, Giuliani's response to a standard legal query played out like a scene from the movie. In legalese, there are 3 levels of review that can be used to determine a statute's constitutionality: the rational basis test, the intermediate scrutiny test, and the strict scrutiny test. When asked by the judge which standard he wanted applied, Giuliani responded, quote, "the normal one." There's no denying that the activities Rudy Giuliani has undertaken on behalf of former President Donald Trump have brought him scorn and humiliation. But could they potentially send him to the slammer? According to a report in the New York Times, Giuliani is alleged to have thought so. As a result, claimed 2 sources, he discussed the possibility of receiving a pardon before the president ended his single term in office. While the Times indicated the extent of Giuliani's criminal exposure wasn't clear, the newspaper also reminded that he was the subject of a federal investigation due to some allegedly shady business dealings in Ukraine, along with his alleged role in the removal of the American ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Contacted by the Times for confirmation, a spokesperson said, "Mayor Giuliani cannot comment on any discussions that he has with his client." However, just 25 minutes before that, Giuliani himself headed to Twitter to say, "Fake news NYT lies again. Never had the discussion they falsely attribute to an anonymous source. Hard to keep up with all their lies." During an appearance on MSNBC, author Michael Wolff shared an anecdote from his book, Landslide: The Final Days of the Trump Presidency, that was illustrative of Giuliani's alleged drinking. On election night in November 2020, Wolff said Giuliani had allegedly been drinking heavily when he came up with a somewhat dubious strategy of having President Donald Trump appear on television to declare victory, despite the election results indicating otherwise. Wolff claimed Giuliani was frantically trying to get to Trump, but was first pulled into a room by White House aides so they could get a handle on his idea. The room that Giuliani was brought into, however, was the China Room, where valuable china used by preceding presidential administrations is displayed. Wolff said, "At that moment, Rudy was incredibly drunk, weaving this way and that way, and obviously the china, those place settings from every president are very valuable, and Trump's aides were obviously or rightfully concerned about what Giuliani was saying to the president about the election and giving him this misinformation." Wolff added, "But they were also concerned that he was going to break the china. He was really drunk." As previously mentioned, in the wake of the 2020 presidential election, Rudy Giuliani and attorneys Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis led numerous court challenges claiming election fraud on a massive scale. One by one, these challenges kept getting thrown out of court for one simple reason: Giuliani's lawsuits may have been bursting with conspiracy theories and nonsensical allegations, but contained no actual evidence. Meanwhile, a statement from Donald Trump's own cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency insisted that the election was the most secure election in the country's history. As the Washington Post reported, Justin Reimer, chief counsel of the Republican National Committee, thought that Giuliani's legal strategy was utterly bonkers. In an email to a former Republican Party spokeswoman, Reimer wrote, "What Rudy and Jenna are doing is a joke, and they are getting laughed out of court. They are misleading millions of people who have wishful thinking that the president is going to somehow win this thing." By early December 2020, Giuliani's multiple court challenges to overturn the results of the presidential election were not going well. One particular appearance at an election fraud hearing in Michigan became infamous, not for what Giuliani said, but for his apparent flatulence. In a brief clip shared on Twitter, Giuliani is speaking when the sound of gas being passed can clearly be heard.
The answer that I gave you is they didn't bother to interview a single witness.
According to an excerpt from Michael Wolff's book, Giuliani's alleged flatulence also got him banned from Trump's debate prep sessions. Wolff wrote, "Rudy Giuliani came once, but no one wanted him back. His phone rang constantly and he couldn't shut it off. He shuffled endless pieces of paper without being able to find what he was looking for. He couldn't work his iPad to bring up what he wanted to show, reliably stalling meetings, and he passed gas constantly." A Business Insider excerpt from Carol D. Lenning and Philip Rucker's book, I Alone Can Fix It, Donald J. Trump's Catastrophic Final Year, further claimed that Trump aides tried to prevent Giuliani from attending the sessions by giving him incorrect times. Just as the humiliation of the Four Seasons total landscaping fiasco began waning, Rudy Giuliani opened himself up to fresh embarrassment in December 2020, with the recount posting a video on Twitter in which he unveiled his new persona, pitchman for cigars and gold coins.
If you want a good cigar, go to a good cigar shop. You want the best, go to Famous Smoke Shop.
That same video featured another product pitch, this time for American Hartford Gold.
Give them a call and tell them Rudy sent you.
The recounts Brennan Murphy decided to do just that and shared audio of his call in a follow-up tweet. Whoever answered the call said, "We love Rudy. We just put Rudy on board as our spokesperson just 10 days ago." Giuliani apparently wasn't the only right-wing figure to be part of American Hartford Gold, with the voice on the phone revealing that disgraced Fox News host Bill O'Reilly was also involved.
It's a fact. The dollar is losing value.
In April 2021, Rudy Giuliani's New York City home was raided by federal agents acting on a search warrant issued by the Southern District of New York. According to a court filing, agents seized 18 electronic devices as part of an investigation into his dealings with Ukraine in his capacity as personal lawyer for then-President Donald Trump. CNN reported that as part of the same investigation, the feds also raided the home of lawyer Victoria Tensing, who, like Giuliani, was a frequent presence on Fox News. According to investigators, the raids were the result of a grand jury investigation into acts involving Giuliani, Tensing, and others after finding evidence that federal crimes had been committed. While Giuliani's lawyer complained to the New York Times that the raid was, quote, legal thuggery, the Times pointed out that the raid was, quote, an extraordinary action for prosecutors to take against a lawyer, let alone a lawyer for a former president. The grand irony, of course, is that Giuliani was once a federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, bringing about the humiliation of being investigated by the very agency he once led. Just 2 months after the raid on his home, Giuliani suffered another embarrassment when a ruling from the New York Supreme Court determined that he had made false statements regarding the 2020 presidential election while serving as lawyer for Trump and the Trump campaign while Trump tried to get re-elected. The ruling further determined that Giuliani's behavior threatened the public interest, and his law license in New York State was suspended. The following month, in July 2021, Giuliani was also barred from practicing law in the nation's capital. As Forbes reported, the District of Columbia Court of Appeals similarly suspended Giuliani's license to practice law. Giuliani's attorneys responded to the suspensions, which are temporary and can be appealed, in a statement, indicating that he was disappointed by the suspensions. The statement added, "We believe that once the issues are fully explored at a hearing, Mr. Giuliani will be reinstated as a valued member of the legal profession." By the summer of 2021, Giuliani was facing legal battles on various fronts, ranging from the ongoing criminal investigation to the 10-figure defamation suits lodged by the voting machine companies that Giuliani disparaged in his attempts to overturn the election. Clearly, Giuliani needed a lot of lawyers, and he set up a crowdfunding effort to pay for his mounting legal fees. It did not go well. As Vanity Fair reported, the Rudy Giuliani Legal Defense Fund was set up in June with a goal of raising a hefty $5 million for his legal fees. After a few weeks, the amount that had been raised was a paltry $9,590, a fraction of the total goal. Days after that report, the effort was quietly shuttered. As the Daily Beast reported, Giuliani's Legal Defense Fund had mysteriously vanished from its online home, likely to prevent the further humiliation of more media reports pointing out how little had been raised by the man once revered as America's mayor. Asked about what had happened to the Rudy Giuliani Legal Defense Fund, Giuliani's lawyer, Robert Costello, told the Daily Beast that he didn't know. Giuliani's alleged shady shenanigans in Ukraine in order to dig up dirt on Hunter Biden made him the focus of a federal investigation. Ukraine, however, apparently wasn't the only country with which Donald Trump's personal lawyer had become embroiled. As ABC News reported, on the same day that Giuliani's license to practice law in New York State was suspended, he was also facing a whole new federal investigation, this time into his dealings with Turkey. According to that report, the federal inquiry was sparked when Giuliani was hired to represent Reza Zarrab in 2017, defending the Turkey-based Iranian-born businessman against charges of money laundering and sanctions evasion. Sources told ABC News that Giuliani, who was then Trump's lawyer, reportedly asked then-Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to drop the case. Zarrab ultimately pled guilty to the charges. In November 2020, the New York Times reported that Rudy Giuliani had requested he be paid $20,000 per day for his services as personal lawyer to Trump, particularly for his work in trying to overturn the presidential election results in his client's favor. A few months later, Giuliani confirmed that one of his people had reached out to Trump's team to float that exorbitant figure. However, that request reportedly led to a falling out between Trump and Giuliani. As the Washington Post reported, the relationship between the men had cooled. In fact, the Post noted that the ex-president told his aides not to pay Giuliani's legal fees and was personally offended by the demand. Trump was reportedly so peeved that officials at the White House were also apparently told not to connect any of Giuliani's calls to Trump. Michael Cohen, who served time in prison after working as Trump's lawyer, offered a bleak prediction.
Okay, so let me be very clear. He's going to get stiffed. All right. Donald Trump, as you properly alluded to, does not pay legal bills.
In his quixotic quest to dig up dirt in Ukraine about Hunter Biden ahead of the 2020 presidential election, was Rudy Giuliani a pawn of Russian intelligence? That was the explosive claim made by Time, which reported on Giuliani's extensive ties to Andrei Derkach, described by the US government as a Russian agent who answered to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. According to Time, Derkach managed to infiltrate Trump's inner circle through Giuliani, earning his trust by providing Giuliani with documents that supposedly proved the corruption of the Bidens. CNN reported that the FBI was aware by the end of 2019 that Giuliani had been targeted by a Russian influence operation with a goal to ensure Trump won the 2020 election by spreading lies about the Bidens. CNN also reported that, despite previous reporting, Giuliani hadn't been warned that he was being duped by the Kremlin. However, the White House was cautioned in 2019 that Giuliani was being used to pass Russian disinformation to Trump, CNN reported. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Nicki Swift videos about your favorite celebs are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.